Well, people have come to call my Chicago Cubs over the last century the lovable losers, because the Chicago Cubs just have this knack for losing when it counts the most, okay? But their fans still love them, no matter what. Now, I don't want to talk about the curse of the Billy Goat from 1945 or the collapse to the Mets in 1969 or 1984 when we were one victory away from going to the World Series. And I'm not going to talk about that Bartman fan who interfered with the fly ball in Wrigley Field 4 years ago. Not going to do that. No. I just want you to know our Cub fans know what it's like. Bitter disappointment. For 100 years now, we've known season after season how to deal with bitter disappointment. Okay. Now, with that, of course, you've got to take some gentle ribbing from other fans of other teams. Maybe you heard that the Chicago Cubs were taking batting practice one day, and the pitching machine threw a no-hitter. Or there's a rumor that the Chicago Cubs are moving to the Philippines, and they're going to change their name to the Manila Folders. Okay. That's true. It's a rumor. It may be true. And last but not least, what's the last thing? What did Jesus say to the Chicago Cubs the last time he was on earth? Yeah. Don't do anything till I get back. Okay. All right. Okay, well, torment aside, Cub fans never give up. Cub fans never give up. That's why we're called die-hard Cub fans. Okay? Year after year, we pin our hopes on a team with Hall of Famers like Ernie Banks and Ryne Sandberg. But by the end of the season, again, we're just bitterly disappointed. But we still love them, win or lose, and you can rest assured that Cub fans take long walks, many long walks in the off season. But by the time April rolls around again, the beginning of the new season, we've got high hopes again. We've got this attitude that says, this is the year. We believe this. We believe that our prayers will be answered. Lord, please let our Cubs win the pennant. What can I say? I'm a Cubs fan. So it's not hard for me to relate to the two disciples in our gospel story this morning on their road to Emmaus. Now, they weren't Cub fans like me, but they had high hopes that turned into bitter disappointment. Or so they thought. You know, Jesus had so many fans in his day, and they had all pinned their hopes in Jesus, the one long-awaited Messiah that, in the end, just hung on a cross to die. You know, they had hoped that this is the one. For hundreds of years, people of Israel were waiting for that long-awaited Messiah to return worship of God to its genuine world-class status. Instead of the temple in Jerusalem being taken over by the priests, you know, like owners of a baseball team, just concerned with the bottom line. For hundreds of years, they had hoped that the temple would be restored once again, and a loving relationship would be restored, that the spirit of the law behind the Old Testament would be glorified in their worship. Along comes Jesus, and he builds up great anticipation with his many followers because he's preaching unconditional love. He's telling everyone that God's grace is for all people, not just for people who think they deserve it. But God's grace is inclusive and universal. And Jesus challenged the status quo. So they're thinking, this is surely the King of Kings, our Hall of Famer, the long-awaited Messiah to save us from political tyranny, from economic corruption, from religious injustice, just as the Scriptures predicted. But as the two disciples on the road to Emmaus walked their long journey from Jerusalem after another season of Passover, all they could think about was Jesus getting himself killed. Like so many prophets before him, there was no thrill of victory, just the agony of defeat. And so with Jesus' death, these two on the road to Emmaus have lost their faith. They have no hope. At the very least, they're very confused. So maybe I'm not the only one who can relate to the two disciples today on the road to Emmaus. Perhaps you know what it's like to have high hopes turn later into brokenheartedness. Remember that college you wanted to go to as a young person but didn't get accepted? Or what about that job you loved and never in a million years did you think you'd get laid off or fired? Did you buy that dream house? Been making those mortgage payments month after month, but the way the economy is going now, maybe it won't turn out as we hoped. You remember your wedding day? The great high hopes you had, and yet perhaps your marriage didn't make it. It fell apart. Or you kept your wedding vows faithfully, but never imagined what end-of-life issues would be like, including grief and loss over a loved one. We all have, as Christians, have had our high hopes in life's passages and seasons. We've had them at times dashed against the rock. Sometimes as disciples, as Christians, sometimes it's just impossible to imagine an Easter day because life brings us so many Good Fridays. So let's remember the good news in this story of the two on their walk to Emmaus. In our gospel story, these two walked on the road for 7 miles, a long journey. For many of us here today, I think it would take us 100 years to walk 7 miles. And they're totally oblivious to the risen Jesus who is at their side the entire time. That's the good news, that the risen Jesus joined them every step of the way, that the risen Jesus walked with them side by side in their time of loss. He asked about their sorrows. He opens the Scriptures to them to help them make sense of it all, especially the part that says his suffering was meant to be. So he says, how foolish of heart you are to make mistakes about who I am and to underestimate the power of God's love. The promise of victory is standing right beside you. So while we all have our Emmaus stories to share, for sure, let's not make the same rookie mistake that these two made on their walk to Emmaus. That the risen Christ is with us every step of the way.